All right. Hello, hello. Welcome everyone here in Charlotte, and thank you to all of you who have joined us online as well. We're going to go ahead and get started. We have a great topic today that I think is of interest in the marketplace. We're going to keep the conversation going here with Andy and myself diving into some questions, but we'll leave some time at the end. So whether you're online remotely here or whether you're in the room, please feel free to start generating some thoughts around any ideas that you would love to bounce off Andy or myself, or we can certainly get other opinions from the room as well too. But we really want to talk a little bit today about AI enablement for financial services. Really just how to enable the benefits that are being sought today via AI solutions, and some of the pitfalls and the approaches that organizations are taking. So we'll dive deep into that. For anyone who hasn't met me yet, my name is Michael Lewandowski. I lead financial services here at Method, and I'll be facilitating, obviously, the conversation, but I want to get you all introduced to our guest first. And so, Andy, if you don't mind, just tell everyone a little bit about your background, your career path, some of the things that you've done, and kind of the perspective that you have.
I'm Andy. I lead design at a company called Taxwell right now. So we help through taxpayers doing it themselves or tax professionals help tens of millions of people file their taxes every year. So Tax Act is our consumer brand and Drake Software is our B2B brand. And before that, I was chief design officer at a company called Constant Contact. So digital marketing solutions. I've led design at Rocket Mortgage, Homes, Loans, Auto, Solar, Finance. Worked with a few Rocket folks out there. Also have led design at Truist. There's some Truist folks here. And at 3M, there's some 3M folks here. It's nice when I get to talk at home, which is really, I've been in Charlotte for almost 6 years and I don't get to be here much. So that's me.
Well, we're really excited to have you. I love that your background is somewhat financial services, but also outside. I think all of what we'll cover today will certainly cover the spectrum of industries and not be specific. But let's go ahead and dive in. Would love just to start out, how are you keeping up right now on AI, just in general, from a personal perspective, from a professional perspective? What are some of the things that you're just doing to try and keep up with the trend?
It's hard. It's hard to keep up. If I look at one of my group chats, it's like blowing up 50 times a day of like, did you see this? Look at what Framer released. Look at this other MCP that's out. And look at this. And like, you've got to take the time to look at it. And then I notice some folks on my team that are like a little hesitant because they're not as on top. And it feels like it comes at you really fast. But ideally, for me, it's play. I think that when you look at the AI solutions that are out there are thought partners for lots of different things. So for me, I use it for ideation. I use it for some of my writing. I also use it to prototype ideas that I have. My team uses it for prototyping as well. One of the use cases that I had was we have NPS data, right? Everybody has NPS data, and it's usually a big spreadsheet and a Tableau document. And it's like, is everybody going to read this or look at this? How do we humanize that? How do we bring that empathy to the rest of the organization? So I take what our NPS scores tell us. It's broken down into different, like how long they've been customers of ours and what SKU they came to us with and where they finished and where they upgraded. And I run that into GPT. I have it create themes, and then I take it to Notebook LM and I turn it into like a 10-minute podcast. And that way I send it out to the whole organization and they hear like what our customers are saying in a digestible way. And even this last month, we had it debate, right? What's weighing heavily more on NPS? Is it the experience or the price of the product? And just having these hosts debate. But again, like I'm still building things. I'm building a lot of like personal little, I think I've rebuilt Notion for fun because Notion wasn't doing everything I needed it to do. And I was like in this Notion, Evernote, Obsidian loop. And I'm like, how do I build something that works specifically for me? So it's really just watching lots of YouTube, just staying on top of it where I can.
I might need to take some notes on your Notion approach. I certainly love it as a tool, but certainly can find ways to enhance it. I think that's really important, Andy. I mean, I think a lot of what we're seeing in the marketplace from our client base is how do we begin to expose people to it? And when you get down to the level of interacting within companies of people from a variety of roles, there's a lot of fear, a lot of lack of understanding about whether it's permissioned, whether or not it is something that they should be exploring, and even just having the knowledge around where to start when you do interact with different models and different instances of artificial intelligence. And so I love how you talked about the personal exploration, the professional exploration. I think it's really interesting too to think about what's working and what's not working with it as you're playing, right? And to keep it in that safe place where you're able to critique it and not just take what the results are, right?
Yeah, and what's interesting is when I've been at Taxwell today's the 17th? Yeah, 6 months today. So when I got there, the designers were a little hesitant about AI. The product folks were using it, like PRDs, doing some research, but there were a lot of tools that we talked about. Could we enhance our workflow? So the first thing I did was hold a little session with the whole team and broke them into groups and said, hey, we're going to solve problems together. We're going to play with tools like Replit and Bolt and Lovable and all of the tools you're hearing about, and just spend an hour, 30 minutes later, come back and share out what you learned. First thing is, it's cool. Second thing, I'm not so worried about it taking my job anymore, because the output's not, it still needs me to do what I do. So I think that alleviated a lot of the fear and started to introduce that into our workflow. And then I did the same thing with our senior leadership team to get them used to seeing how we use these AI tools for like product building. And I think that the more you get to interact with it, the less scary that it feels and is. But ideally, if you look at what the outputs were when we did this 6 months ago, and if we go into Figma Make now, or we go into any of these tools, still V0, right? They haven't changed that much. It's still very like wireframey. Yeah, I can import my Figma library, or I can upload a Figma file, or import my design system, but it still feels like, okay, you've colored some of the nav bar, right? It's still not fully there. So I think I'm waiting for the next big advancement, because it's coming for sure.
Yeah. I think the most important thing I take away from that is almost the demystification that you're talking about there. Demystification in terms of the approachability and the curiosity to engage with it. Demystification in terms of the fear of it being something that has a threat to you as an individual within the corporate environment. I think that's all really important for people to actually get comfortable with, so that they understand. And then from a leadership perspective, demystification of the expectations, because if the expectations are too high, then there's going to be challenges in terms of, well, why aren't we producing results and objectives yet? And I think that's maybe a great jumping off point is, what is some of what you're seeing different companies in the industry do wrong when they're talking about AI as a means to, versus, call it just traditional problem solving approaches?
Yeah, so I think that AI we know it's a technology. And when it first really started to come on the scene, when people started to gain adoption, I think everyone thought that it was going to solve all of the problems for us. We're going to throw this technology at a problem, and it's just going to eat through it, and it's going to get us to a solution really fast, and it's going to be great. And, like any other emerging technology, yes, it catches on and it does things and it's cool and it moves fast, but how you actually apply it so that it impacts people, that still needs to be tweaked. That still needs people that actually care, that understand customers, that understand business objectives, to make sure that what we're doing is building the right thing. We could, like now, yeah, you can build anything, but is it the right thing?
Yeah, I like that. I think just leading up to this talk this week, I saw an interview with Tim Cook, and he gave one this week on CNBC and was talking about AI, and said in his lifetime, it's by far and away the most transformative technology that has come along. He's not a young man. There's been some important technologies. He's certainly on the cusp of it. I almost questioned the question of like, does it warrant looking at AI? And so from your perspective, what's the right balance of thinking about AI as a means to a certain end of a problem that you need to solve from a user perspective or from an ecosystem perspective, versus taking a more traditional problem solving approach, human-centered design, really figuring out where needs are, and then thinking about the how later? Is AI meaningful enough that we need to give it a little bit more prominence almost?
Right. First question I have is, everybody in this room a designer or product person? Not everybody? Oh, okay. Tim Cook Apple started last week's announcement with the Steve Jobs quote that talked about how design is not just what it looks like, design is how it works. And I feel like Apple has gone so far from that at their core that it was kind of like, I don't know. So I understand Tim Cook's seen a lot of technologies. We all have. And for me, working in AI, my first introduction to working with AI was back when I was at 3M, and it was natural language processing. We did auto-suggested coding for medical billing. We looked at outpatient procedures and thought about how we can get, codes, charts out the door quickly, and hospitals get paid for those patients once they're out. Then we shifted to focus on a flagship software. And at that point, we were encountering a lot of people, clinical documentation specialists, doctors, medical coders that were collaborating. And they saw our tool as a potential threat. They were like, this is going to take my job. And we're like, no, it's going to enhance your workflow. We're going to try to automate the things that don't matter. So the things that matter, you can pay close attention to make sure that the outcomes are right. And they were still hesitant. And we were on the road probably for a year and a half, every other week at different hospitals. And what was the most interesting thing is the government changed the diagnosis classification. They went from ICD either 8 to 9 or 9 to 10. And at that point, the level of specificity got so great that they were like, wait, like, I don't remember these codes. I'm going to like trust the machine for a minute and validate. And at that moment, you saw that workflow change where they were leveraging AI as supporting their workflow. And they were still in the driver's seat of validating, of submitting. It wasn't agentic, right? I think for me, that was the moment where I'm like, this is going to be an interesting hurdle because we always hear about like job loss and efficiency and things. And I think that we see great efficiency in certain areas, right? I mean, we can have 100 concepts in 5 minutes instead of 5. But does the brain even think that fast? Do we need to think that fast? Are they all good? And then once we start to introduce like agentic AI, and then, if you use Comet as your web browser and it enters, the coolest thing it does for me is enter coupon codes for me when I'm on a site. And I love that. But now I haven't even moved my information in there. So when I'm on Safari, yes, I still use Safari. I then go to Comet and like, can you generate some coupon codes for the site that I'm on? And then I enter them myself because it takes me 5 seconds and I don't need it. But I think companies, back to your core question, I think companies saw it as a one size fits all, solve all my problems solution. And they've learned, and we've seen the reports of like how many of these digital transformations and how many of these AI investments, especially when they're built by themselves in-house, are not being successful. And I think now they're looking at, okay, how do I take I hate to talk about people in numbers. I'm not good at numbers. But if you think about all of us as one whole person, right? Some people on your team are probably 1.25. Some people might be 0.75. It happens, but ideally in terms of output, we're 1.0 right now. If AI could get us to 1.25, if every person can, with a little bit of help, do 25% more of something that they wouldn't have done, that's where the accelerant is happening. It's not, let's reduce this workforce by 40%. It's, how do I take these 10 people or these 100 people and make it like 115, right? And I think that's where we're starting to see the payoffs come. It's not in solving the products that we release yet. But again, it's moving fast.
Yeah, thank you. And for the record, I agree with you on all of that. And I think that was really the impetus for the talk today, is we are still seeing companies and whatnot taking an approach of looking for problem statements with AI as the answer, and not really thinking through what must be true across an entire ecosystem for benefits to be enabled. And I'd love to kind of dive into that a little bit with you about thinking around the entire ecosystem, the people, the processes, and the technology, and all the things that must be true for a problem to really be solved. Maybe we could even do a little bit of a look back. I think back to the first wave of digital and the number of, call it, front-end solutions with Wizard of Oz backends that we saw created within various industries, the number of things that were maybe created for digital solutions for DIY purposes just to get efficiency,
Right.
but really didn't enhance experiences very well. Maybe just kind of, look back with me on maybe lessons we can take from other waves of technology and say, hey, how might we learn from a more systems thinking approach, a more, ecosystem, human-centered problem solving? Going back to your notion of workflows, like how can we take some of those lessons and do better with AI this time around?
Yeah, I promised myself I wouldn't say anything bad, but now that I think about it, we fucked up a lot of things along the way, right? And we're learning from those. I think if you look at the early days of the web, it was fun. It feels like AI does now. And we built things that weren't inclusive, that were actually exclusive, that didn't support everybody. Then we went to a new technology, right? Mobile devices, web, whatever we can do, facial recognition, and there were biases built into that. So I think there's a sense of fear in that sense of like everything we've heard about AI from when we were kids, we're like, it's dystopian, it's Skynet, it's going to eat the world. And now we're like, it's a technology and let's just run with it. And it's like, wait, all the mistakes we made in the past, how do we not make them again with this? And I think we've learned a lot as people in the digital space. So I don't think that we will make all of the same mistakes, but there are things we don't know. So a lot of people here are in financial services, almost everybody. And when you think about financial services and AI, or you think about healthcare and AI, and like there's still a level of AI is a little bit of a black box for a lot of people, and there's data going in, data coming out, but nobody really sees the algorithms as well as they'd like. So, it's harder to adopt in highly regulated environments. I talk to teams all the time that are like, hey, I don't get to use the tools that you talk about all the time. I use certain AI tools, maybe, right? So because they work in a really risk averse, like highly regulated environment, and they'd rather err on the side of caution than like take this risk. So I think that's a big hurdle that AI still has to overcome. But no, that's it.
Yeah. No, I think, I spend a lot of time thinking backward to think forward. Part of that's my nature as a historian, and part of that's just, I think, good lessons learned from experience, right? And, if I look in financial services as an industry, so many things were built in silos as solutions. They maybe were built for the purpose of efficiency, but not necessarily for overall experience or what a user truly needs to accomplish. And then, you spend years unpacking those. You're trying to then sell more products to people. Well, if you hadn't developed things in silos, if you didn't, make something, do it yourself, and instead interacted with the customer to uncover more of what they were trying to achieve in their life, you may now have a more productive relationship for them personally and for you and your organization. And so I think one of the things that I see a lot right now is let's go get efficiency, let's go get productivity. But it's not a holistic view from a business strategy perspective around what's the best thing and what are we ultimately trying to solve for there.
Yeah, it's funny because some of the most recent conversations I've had, especially taking on a new team, you hear about opportunities for the design to be improved, right? Like the design could be a little bit better. And then you notice, all right, I put a different designer on that. Someone's still saying, looks a little bit off. Put another designer on it. I'm like, this is like a good designer. Still a little bit off. There's something wrong with the design. And I'm like, it's not the design. Decisions haven't been made. So design becomes a mirror for decisions that get made in the organization. It's a reflection of what you're seeing in a way that you can react to it. So if there were decisions that hadn't been made about product or pricing or any other decision that gets made, to put a product, bring a product to life. And then there's misalignment. So the designer is getting feedback from different people and it's conflicting feedback and it's showing up in the designs. All of a sudden, you're adding AI onto that. It's just moving faster and faster. So design still becomes that space that's showing, hey, wait, look, you see what's wrong here? That's wrong because we didn't make this decision. We didn't finalize this decision. We didn't agree upon this. And what looks off to you is actually what someone else in the room said was right. So how do we start to illuminate this disconnect? And design's doing that. And at the speed of AI, if we're able to match that to some extent, right? Bring things to life a little bit faster, we're able to make those decisions and get that alignment even quicker.
I love it. I think it's a great departure into another area of the conversation I really want to dig into you today, which is really around, how do you have the right objectives and how do you understand the possibility of the future and what impact does that have to users across the ecosystem? I think probably more than ever, we see the opportunity for profound effects on internal users, whether it be employees, and a change in their whole jobs that have been in industries for many generations, to a future state that's just a different type of internal employee that's operating within an organization. Or if we look at end users of products, what is the impact of what we're capable of doing from a technology on the way that they interact with products and the way that they're able to achieve goals and objectives that they have out there in their day-to-day lives. So, let's spend just a little bit of time talking about, again, thinking through the full impacts of what you're capable of doing and how do you really understand what changes across the ecosystem, particularly in terms of users, and how you evaluate whether those users are still the same people, do they have the same needs, or the needs evolve over time? Because I think that's a really interesting area.
Yeah, I think people's needs evolve over time. They adapt to different technologies, the speed at which responses come back. I'm gonna steal an example that we talked about earlier that he gave me. He talked about, we talked about, you said, these interfaces, right? There are things that over years of building, certain customers have gotten used to finding in the same place, right? And maybe we've built 100 new features and 10% of them are used 80% of the time. Yet we still have this bloated navigation. We still have this bloated way to find things. And when anything new gets added, it's either put front and center and pushes everything else down, or it's hidden somewhere. And as we think through these new types of interfaces that we can build, having the ability to just search, to query, to say what you want, to input what you need, instead of having to look for it, is like more natural behavior for people, right? Sorry for stealing that example, but it was like, it's resonated with me since we talked about it.
I think that's the speed at which this is happening now. And what spurred this conversation that we were having, before we got started today was, I think especially for internal employees of organizations, we all have seen, you could probably look out the windows if there are still people working here in Charlotte and see 3 different screens with 5 different softwares up, all disparate with no interconnected data, no interconnected statusing. Employee experiences in particular have been ignored and haven't been touched, never had a human-centered design element for them for 20 plus years. Some of them are still green screens. We then had started to go in the last 5 to 10 years into dashboards, productivity dashboards, unified statusing, workflow, cross users. How do you bring these tasks together into the jobs to be done of an employee? And now I'm even seeing across some clients, well, why would we even need a dashboard? What if we could just ask a question in a Slack chat or a Teams chat or in email and engage with a large language model and start a workflow rather than have to go to a dashboard? And I think that is something that is happening, while we're speaking right now, that evolution around where is the centricity of these things. I think where I went in my conversation with my client today on that topic was interesting in the sense that I think some of the principles don't change. Whether you're creating a master dashboard, there are certain things that you want to convey on status, on workflow, on actionability. There maybe are some easy tasks that can be resolved there, but there are probably more deeper experiences that you really need to immerse with and explore and have rich data sets and other things around as well too. So whether that's a dashboard or whether that's something you're starting in a chat, I think it's the similar principle from a design and experience perspective, right? Like, what is the overall status workflow? Where do things initiate, and then where do they need to spend more time? And I think from a behavior perspective, that's going to be fascinating to watch.
Right. And it really is a lot of just old-fashioned ethnography. And some of it, I mean, we use some AI tools for research, and AI will moderate the session for you. It's okay, right? Like, shout out to Genway is a great company. Marvin also doing some really interesting things in that front. But I think when we think about like how people use products, and we talked a little bit about the employee experience, or, when you think about banks or mortgage companies, the loan officer side, the banker side, what does their experience look like versus the consumer side? And that often gets neglected because it's like, well, we're paying them, they're using it, they know how to do it, they key through it, like it's fine, we'll fix it at some point. But now the interface, if we can bring things all together and kind of just leverage some APIs and give them what they need at their fingertips by understanding what they truly need, not just through a dashboard to see how productive they are, because surprise, they're not as productive because the software takes 10 minutes to load and the green screen turns off and they've got to reboot and someone's on the phone with them and it's not going well. And, we're doing a sentiment analysis on why somebody's pissed off and it's like the software's failing them. So as we start to think about areas that we can leverage AI, emerging tech, to really like amplify people's workflows, it's about understanding them. Like, service design is seeing a new renaissance again. Like it was hot, then it kind of fizzled, and then it got hot again, and then people weren't really sure what to do with it, and then COVID hit and everything, who knows what. But ideally now we're starting to see like how are service designers leveraging AI to look at the entire end-to-end experience that happens across every touch point, and how do we start to highlight those in a way? And another discipline that's you talked a little bit earlier about how we can see the future is strategic foresight, right? If we're not starting to plan for future scenarios and then where things can go, and then running that through some sort of custom LM or something, custom GPT, to really see how that impacts not just our industry specifically, but adjacent industries over time. And one of the things we talked about, I'm rambling, sorry, is we talked a little bit about, there was a time where it was so important to have this domain expertise, right? In financial services, it was currency. If you start a new job, you can get that domain expertise faster than ever because of AI. AI understands a lot of that. Like, I'm not saying the domain expertise isn't important, but the learning curve has gotten a lot sharper, or I don't know, it's faster. We'll go with that. And to me, what I'm seeing is we've got to figure out where that we can leverage the right AI technologies to really like help us get that learning curve, because that's not the currency anymore, but it's how quickly we can ship something, right? How quickly we can build and get feedback and solve problems at the core.
That's a really good ramble, and please continue to ramble. I think there are three things that I took out of that I want to reinforce. One is the rebirth of service design and frankly, the importance of it, right? We're talking about transformation, which is always a scary word and a word no organization wants to hear, but we're in an era where things will transform. And the first step of transformation to me is always, do you have an understanding of what's happening in the current state? How are you delivering value in the current state? Where is it common in the ways that you are doing it, and where is it different? And if you're envisioning a different future state, then you have to work your way backwards and kind of figure out how to deliver that transformation in a way that's going to iteratively release the value that you're hoping it will for your organization. That's another step of service design, but it is also another area that's being reborn, which is change management, enablement, whatever you want to coin the modern version of it, is another area that we're seeing a lot of increase in questions and demand. And it ties back to where we started, here in this little segment, which is users. How are users needing to change? How is workflow changing as a result of technology enabling people to be different? How do people need to change? And how quickly can people change? Right. So let's maybe spend like one more minute on like, technology can move fast, people and organizational models cannot. And so I think there's this really interesting element where we're seeing a lot of trepidation in strategy around how do we pick the right horizon to aim at with confidence that that's the capability of AI that we want to invest in. How quickly can our organization pivot to that? And how do we make sure that they actually adopt the solutions that we're going to build? So riff off of that for a second if you want.
Yeah, change is hard. People are even harder. So when you combine the two, it's like it's people are always that variable that you never know what's going to happen. So when you think about change management, the first thing, if you lead people, you should read a book on crisis management. It's really, really interesting to see how people that do that for a living are able to plan for scenarios and kind of work their way in and have a plan B, a C, and D no matter what happens. Now, when I think about how we can, I think design is a catalyst for change, right? I think we all agree that there are opportunities that we can really, from a non-threatening way, from a show where things are going, we can start to spark change. But turning around a big ship, I worked at 3M, 90,000, 100,000 employees, and less than 1/100th of 1,000th of 1% were designers, right? We worked on a team, we had a team of 4 that were supporting 72 different engineering teams. And for us, it's like, can you start to be that little pocket of change? And can you start to amplify and help the organization kind of see what moving fast is, what it means, how you get a small pocket, and then does it spread? Because it's hard. It's not, we could be working in healthcare and then you've got a division that's focused on critical and chronic care or infection prevention. And it's like, how did they learn what's happening over there? So part of change management is socialization. It's spending the time to talk about the work that your team is doing, to amplify that work so that people could see it. And then you notice someone else is like, hey, you know what? Whatever's happening over there, I want some of that. It's the same way we've grown design teams over time. You let them have a taste of what it is. And then when they see it and they feel it and they get the results from it, they want more of it. And it's the same thing when organizations are trying to change. Everybody wants to change. You'll notice there's 5 different teams doing almost the exact same thing. And it's like, wait, did nobody talk to each other about this? You're all building a new authentication flow, or you're all standing up a new way to ingest documents. Like what's going on here? And how do we start to socialize that so people can be aware of what other people are doing? And I think design as a horizontal has that insight that a lot of other areas that operate in verticals don't see. So it's going to be on us to how we socialize that. For me, how I've done that, we've done newsletters that go out to the whole company for each area. We've created Confluence pages with Figma links that anyone could click in at any point in time if they want to see what's going on. We've made sure that in the design reviews, that the designers in the different areas are seeing what each person is working on, because they're the front lines. They're the ones that are going to tell the PM, hey, you know what? I saw this other thing. This other PM was working on something similar. Why are we both doing this? Do you talk? Right? So I think when we get to change management, it really is about how we communicate, and communicating with clarity is key.
Yeah, so much goodness there. And I think communication is the center of change, right? If people don't understand why, if they don't understand within the context of their own roles and their own objectives, how things will impact them, and they can't connect, all of that, the adoption curves are never there. I think what's really fascinating is, I think you did hit understanding human motivations, understanding human behavior, the nature of research. It is the nature of design. And there are some really great ways actually in which AI is enabling, change to be a more effective thing, to be more contextualized. When a new app has a new feature, it, prompts us and makes us aware while we're in the moment of clicking on that feature, and gives us tool tips that we can dismiss or take, right? And I think, too often not, you still have, kind of legacy change. We'll do an announcement, and then we'll do a training, and then people will just go out and they'll adopt this new tool. But so much of it is about in the moment contextualization. When you're using a given feature is going to be when you're going to adopt it the most. And so I think both from an internal as well as an external, there's all these ways in which the adoption and enablement need to be embedded within the products and experiences themselves. And thankfully, the technology exists to do some of that now too.
Exactly. And then you have different customers, right? So some companies, one place I worked, the average customer age was 55. And we were trying to target, as young people as we can to try to use our software. And it's like, wait, we're going to try to change 85% of our user base, how they work, because we want to attract this new customer. Is there an opportunity to build a separate experience, build a standalone product that feels like something new that brings people back. I think we often think change and we think big jarring change, especially in the tech space. But we have to realize that the people that use our product, they're creatures of habit. They learn a lot on like different consumer apps, and we've got I guess the advantage even with AI of like we didn't have to educate people on AI because everybody was doing it and it became table stakes in certain ways. So, if you're working for commercial card interfaces, like Airbnb is probably not the best example for what you want to be, but everyone's like, we should be the Airbnb of commercial card services, right? Like you can't be just yet. You've got to figure out how to get there. You've got to find how to bridge that gap.
Yeah. All right. I want to shift gears, but stay within the context of change to a certain extent. I think probably in the last week, I have gotten more questions around what the product delivery lifecycle of the future will look like. And I want to approach that with you from two different lenses. One, the people who are in the product delivery lifecycle today versus who those people might be from a skill set and a perspective go forward. And then up front in the top of our conversation today, you mentioned a whole bunch of tools that it sounds like you're exploring within the context of work, and go as deep into any of those that you're having fun with as well too, and how they're starting to chip away at either enabling productivity, efficiency gains, or other things across the product delivery lifecycle as well too.
Okay. All right. So I will, because I forgot the first part, I will go right to the second part and talk about how right now, Figma Make is one of the tools that we use to ideate. It's been really helpful for us to crank out some really fast ideas, prototypes, thoughts, potentially get it in front of people. I think the biggest breakthrough for us has been Figma's MCP server. And there's a lot of debate around like, yeah, why are you using that? You could use 8,000 other things. But we're a Figma shop and Figma has become our source of truth. And having an MCP server that allows us to take our Figma files and let our engineering team use what they use, which is Cursor with Claude. This connection allows more seamless integration of how we work in our workflow. So it's really important for us as we think through like how the teams actually function to try to be worked with a person. I'm going to go off on a tangent because it made me think about all the different tools. Fred Beecher at Rocket was at the Nerdery, was our head of ops. And he always said, I'd much rather have one tool that's not so great than 10 great tools, because you're in the same tool, everybody's in the same tool, and it's not like disparate parts and pieces trying to come together and things getting lost. So for us, Figma's become that, right? We'd rather use the tool that the whole organization is using through the product lifecycle. Now I remember the second part, the product lifecycle. So when we think about the product development lifecycle, we used to talk about ratios. How many designers to engineers to PMs? Why is it so off? What's going on here? Like that shit's over. I think that right now we're looking at small teams where we can. Obviously, large enterprise organizations have a way of working, and that way of working works for them. But you're seeing more like pockets of teams stand up that the lines are being blurred. There's a quote that I said on the board before about like we're moving to this era of what I call the I'm sure I'm not the only one, the full stack builder. It's, do you understand product? Do you understand design? Do you understand engineering? So that these become tools in our toolkit. We used to talk about like we're seeing a certain thing through the lens of design, right? But the lens of design is also the lens of product. It's the lens of technology. So when we think about where this sits, I'm not saying every designer needs to learn the code, not saying that every designer needs to write product requirements, but those that do can operate in small teams and move things faster. Now, it may just be used to ideate on something and to test and experiment and see if something worked. And then it gets put back into the way the rest of the company works. And that's fine. But being able to have small, nimble teams will always generate lots of learning. And that's what we need right now.
Yeah, I think a couple of things I want to pause on and spend a little bit more time talking about. I think the first is, something I've been leaning into throughout the conversation, which is a human behavior change, an ideological change even beyond that. We have for many generations now been moving towards a specialized society. you have this skill set, you get tracked to that skill set earlier in your education and professional career. And you have your subject matter experts and your designers and your product people, right? And fundamentally, that feels like it is going to change. That no longer will it be a specialization society, but more of a systems thinking type of approach around, do you really understand the end-to-end around how things interact to produce value? And if you can do that, then you can become the full stack individual that you are there. I think an idea that I was having fun, so we'll test this out live, was singularity obviously has its own connotations in the market right now. But when people have been asking me about what does it take to be a product delivery team of the future, singularity of focus and, singularity of incentives, singularity of understanding of the business, all need to be there. The teams need to be small. They need to be cross-functional. They need to understand left, right, up, and down. Otherwise, they're never going to be able to capture the efficiencies and productivity gains that are envisioned by some of these things, right?
Yep, 100%. I think, we just got done telling designers they need to learn the business. And now we're saying you need to learn these emerging technologies. And I think that you do need to learn both because they're both important in who we are and how we work. But when we think about like where that's going over time, to me, like right now, if we all pulled out a computer, we can create an app, literally like come up with some requirements, come up with a problem statement, come up with some solutions, create something that you can click through, then code it if you want to, right? And if you can't do that in 30 minutes, you probably should play with it a little bit more because it's not gonna be great, but it's gonna be functional and you're gonna learn from it. And I think when we think about that future, your whole team is gonna do that. And we used to say, hey, designers used to get mad when like someone would draw on paper for us what they thought. And now we have PMs that are like, I mocked up this whole like app that I'm trying to show you. And we're starting to get offended again. And it's like, no, they're actually communicating to us in our language now. This is a way that we can start to communicate with these different disciplines where we used to talk over each other, even though we were saying the same thing. Now it's like, forget backlog grooming. Like, let's do some prompt grooming. Let's groom this prototype. Forget a design review. Like, let's jump in and look at this. And I think that is where the accelerant has happened. And I also think that is where we're headed, right? Like you said, it's like, can these different individuals just go like, yeah, at some point we have to make sure that the 50 of us in this room are not all like building the same thing at the same time. It just doesn't make sense. But, how we methodically approach that is going to be important.
Yeah, and I think back to where we started with some of the fear, I think there is a consensus viewpoint forming, an ideological viewpoint forming around what makes us uniquely human versus what is technology capable of. And routinely, you see empathy, you see creativity, you see some of the things that are natural for designers and for researchers and for people of the craft to embrace. I think some of the areas that need to continue to be rounded out are leadership, problem solving, understanding of broader impacts from a business perspective in order to then realize some of the creative ammunition and horsepower, so to speak, around that can be harnessed from the technology itself, right?
Yeah, 100%.